right, let's get right into it. So I have a meeting next Wednesday at this time. So next Wednesday, I will have a recording up for you to look at here. So we won't meet next Wednesday. And then do you know already for week 4 what day you're meeting for your 7 a.m. class?
For the day, like Wednesdays and Fridays.
Yeah.
Wednesday.
Okay. All right. So we'll plan then to um, meet then on Wednesdays for you.
Okay.
Unless would you prefer Fridays?
It doesn't matter. I think Wednesday will be better.
Okay. Yeah, because I was, since there's only one of you, I didn't want to really make it a terrible inconvenience for you to have to like go to school or go to class physically more than one day a week. I know one of the things that we're seeing at my other school, because we're doing kind of the same blended thing there, is the administrators didn't do the greatest job with scheduling the in-person classes that well. So they're seeing that students are having a difficult time going from, say, a Zoom class at whatever 7 a.m. to a live class at 9 a.m. because they're just like from travel time kind of thing. So yeah, I want to try to avoid that as much as I can here. All right. This week, you don't have anything due. So this is probably the easier one here. Next week, you're going to have this history of softball assignment. And this was kind of a pretty polarizing assignment for many people, at least last year. It should be easy, but you also need to make sure that you are hitting all the parts with it. The big thing people had problems with was numbers 1 and 2, how the big changes occurred from initially starting, like when softball first started, to kind of now. So what you want to do is you want to look at historically how the game was initially set up. You don't need to go into every detail about every single rule or anything like that, but you just want to hit the broad points, like what was the field like? What were the bats, the balls, gloves, bases, that kind of thing. You do want to discuss if there were any like huge changes or huge rule issues that you didn't see or that you don't see with the modern game. For example, like in baseball, when baseball was first developed, you had to throw underhand. There were no gloves. And if you hit a ball in the air and caught it, it was 2 outs. If you hit a ball and it bounced once and then you caught it, it was an out. So like obviously those are huge changes you saw from the beginning of the game to what you see now. So that's the kind of big things I would want you to see or to talk about as far as like rules wise between the early game and the current game. When you talk about part 3, the comparison between high school, college, fast pitch or professional fast pitch and international, just talk about the broad points with it. You don't need to say like, oh, the competition's better here. Yes, we know the competition's better. But again, you want to see if there's any major rule changes that go in effect. And in terms of, say, high school and college, just talk about your own high school and your own college. So you don't have to talk about like every high school or anything like that, but just talk about anything that was pertaining to your particular high school. Because I know a lot of different like ground rules and little like procedural rules will change based on where you're at. But you just, again, want to hit the major points with it. And then the statement on the impact of softball on culture and society, you know, that should be pretty self-explanatory, but you primarily want to see or look at how fast pitch softball has an impact on culture and society, not like slow pitch or co-ed or anything like that, just fast pitch.
Awesome.
I don't know why that my internet's going really slow right now. I just uploaded a bunch of videos and it went so fast. And now it's like web pages are just going slow here.
My loud cloud isn't working. It's not loading.
Well, maybe it is just loud cloud. All right, so I don't want to spend all day here doing all this with you, but I do want to go over our communication kind of plan here. So we'll be covering communication really today and a little bit on Friday. And on Friday, we'll also get into the start of motivating players and motivational interviewing. When you're communicating with players, or well, when you're communicating as a head coach, there's three primary groups of people that you need to communicate with: your players, your assistant coaches, and then typically the administration. I like to think that, especially in college or above, you don't communicate with parents much. Now, have you been coaching at all already, like in the high school level?
Just for 2 games.
Okay. So you had, I mean, but you did essentially like the full preseason kind of thing last year?
Yeah, kind of.
Okay.
It was a little complicated.
All right. Well, I mean, you at least have some experience doing it, so that's still a good thing. Now, when you're communicating with, first off, your assistants, you got to look at what each person's role is and then why you are communicating with them. All communication needs to have a purpose. You know, granted, if you're just making small talk with someone, that's, you know, that's something itself. But when you're communicating with someone in relation to the game, just as a whole, there needs to be a purpose to it. You don't just talk with someone just to hear yourself talk, or at least you shouldn't. So having your intent well established is kind of the basic premise for it. Now, we talked last week about, you know, one of the things that, say, like assistant coaches or head coaches try to do for assistant coaches is to develop them and their skill level, so eventually they can take over as an assistant coach there or somewhere else. If you look at, say, the basic breakdown of who your coaching staff is, you have kind of these 5 basic categories for coaches: the head coach, a pitching coach, a hitting coach, bench coach, and a recruiting coordinator or recruiting coach. Pretty self-explanatory to say, you know, what everyone's role is. You know, pitching coach works with the pitchers, hitting coach the hitters, bench coach is really just there to help be an assistant during the game kind of thing. Recruiting coordinator or recruiting coach is going to be the person to go out and not only say scout other teams, but also to scout for players. And the head coach needs to be able to do pretty much all of it. So how do you, first off, as an assistant, build your skill set in a different field? So how does a pitching coach become a better hitting coach, kind of thing?
My main thing is observing, but like I know if you're doing your own thing, you're not going to be able to be in two places at once to observe them.
That's true.
But I know just like I guess seeing how the players play in a way, I don't know if that makes sense, but like they'll learn from like if they're doing a good job or not based off of like their players' capabilities, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, observation is a great way to be learning there. When you think of, and thinking back to what I said before about, assistants trying to become head coaches, when you're a head coach, you do have to know how to do everything. But think about even from a pitching coach's perspective. Okay, yeah, obviously you need to teach pitchers how to pitch and all that good stuff. But why would it be important for you as a pitching coach to know how to teach hitters to hit in your role as a pitching coach?
In case something happens, I guess, and one leaves, then you know how to do both jobs.
Maybe. But think about with like even say calling a game. If I know how to teach hitters to hit, then I know how to pitch against them, right? So if you're able to have your hitters, or I'm sorry, have your pitchers know how to approach a hitter because you know how hitters themselves are approaching, their whole process of hitting, it's going to make pitching a lot easier because now you can kind of cross over that skill set to make sure your pitchers are able to better pitch against your hitters, but at the same time, you're able to better equip your hitters to hit against the pitchers. Kind of a cyclical thing. Now, you think of then going on to be like a recruiting coordinator or a recruiting coach. Their primary responsibility is scouting. Now, as like say a pitching coach, if I know how to properly scout other players, especially other hitters, I can then better equip my pitchers to pitch against them. Then once I'm able to establish that skill, now I can also more effectively scout for players that I want on my team, because now I know, or I have a more refined skill set on what I'm looking for and what would fit in with my program's needs or my program's type of strategy that we're trying to teach there. You see how that kind of all works cyclically.
Yeah.
While you need to specialize in one, because that's your job, you need to grab parts of the others so that it better helps you with developing your personal skill set.
Yeah. Also, I don't know if it's me, but my Wi-Fi keeps cutting really bad. So if I don't respond, it's because I didn't hear anything. Okay.
That's fine. All right, now, one of the things I asked the baseball class was, what happens if you are a pitching coach and during a game, the head coach tells you to call your pitches a certain way to a particular batter that you don't agree with? As the pitching coach, what would your response be and what would your actions be?
I apologize. It cut out after you said
Okay.
things.
So you're the pitching coach during a game, and the head coach tells you to call the pitches for this batter a certain way that's against what your scouting report was. What do you do as the pitching coach?
You said the head coach asked him?
Yeah.
So there's not much time to discuss it, but
Not really. Yeah.
um I guess I would just follow through with what he asked and then afterwards see the outcome and discuss it with him later. But I feel like if they have more authority over me, I should listen to them. But at the same time, it's like that's not the way I coach. So
Yeah. And that's pretty much a perfect take on it right there. During a game, you have to defer to the head coach. It's just like you said, with their position of authority, you really can't be going against what they're saying, especially openly in front of players or openly in front of other coaches. You got to make sure that there's that open line of communication, but at the same time, there's an open chain of command. So it is kind of best to follow through with what they say and then basing that on the result, discussing, like, say, after the game, if you had like a coaches meeting, why you would do certain things or why you did that, why you deviated from the plan, that kind of thing. The worst thing you can do is openly defy the head coach in front of either the other coaches or the rest of the team. And then when you're communicating with coaches, this typically needs to be a closed door or behind or away from players type of setting. You don't really want to be communicating with coaches, especially when you are either debating or just even discussing your basic philosophical ideas or coaching strategies in front of the team. You don't want to see any potential, discord or any, potential debating be misconstrued for one coach defying the other kind of thing. So on the field, during the game, anything like that, the assistants really have to defer to the head coach. And that should be something that is well established ahead of time. Now, when you're talking to players and you're meeting individually with them, what are you typically talking about? Now, this wouldn't be necessarily in the middle of a game, but when you have individual meetings with players, what does that usually entail?
how their performance is going.
Okay, performance issues, definitely. What else do you think of?
It could also be just like I don't know how to say it, but like personal stuff or like how they're like their attitude on and off the field or stuff like that.
Okay. I think of also when you're meeting with the player, you're talking about, like, say, their role in the team, the expectations for them, what your general plan is for using them. Typically, you're meeting with players at the very, very beginning of the season, and you may do this before you even start with any practicing, just to kind of either do like a get to know you session or to just set general expectations for them. You typically want to meet with players individually at the end of like your fall or like your fall season. Um, this is usually to set the expectations for what their role is going to be during the season, things they need to be improving on, things they're doing well, that kind of stuff. And then you usually want to meet with players again after the season to kind of get a overview of how not only they feel the season went, but where, again, they have issues or places to improve upon, what they can be doing in the future, that kind of thing. When you meet with players in season individually, for the most part, it's usually about something bad, like typically performance or, for like disciplinary reasons. Now, sometimes you meet with players and yeah, it's for, good things. But when you think of the stereotypical getting called into the coach's office, if it's mid-season, it's usually something not great. But it's still necessary to do that. And it's also especially good to be open and honest with your players so that there isn't any miscommunication about, say, their role or what they need to do on the team, that kind of thing. one of the worst things you can do is, especially like in the fall season, you give a player a bunch of repetitions and they are getting all these, essentially first string or first team type repetitions. And then at the, or at the beginning of the season, they're just not even like on the travel roster kind of thing. You think of what kind of message that sends. It's showing that you aren't conveying a clear message with your players. If you were, say, starting first baseman for the entire fall, and then game one, you're not even on the roster kind of thing, what's going through your mind as a player?
I did something wrong. Like, I'm not good enough. Uh, Honestly, like, I wouldn't want to be there anyways if they're not going to communicate with me. So,
I mean, yeah, those are definitely all things I would myself personally think of. I would just be extremely frustrated at the beginning. What happened? Why didn't anybody tell me anything? You know, there was absolutely no indication that I wasn't going to be starting, let alone not even on the roster kind of thing. Now, if you have that same scenario, but you now communicate with the player after, say, the fall league, but before, our season starts, look, we wanted to give you a whole bunch of repetitions here because we see you developing into our starter or you developing into a major contributor to the team, but we don't quite think you're there yet. Now, what's your perceptions going into the season?
um, a lot better one just because they're telling me, but same time I would still be like frustrated, but I think that'd be more personal stuff. But um, yeah, I'd respect them a lot more, especially.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, it sucks for anyone when something like that happens. But at the same time, it's hard to not respect someone who is open and honest with you.
Mhm.
If I all of a sudden said next week, we're not having class, and then I decided at the last minute, oh, we are going to have class and we have a pop quiz, and you weren't there because I told you we didn't have class, and then you saw a 0 on your grade, what would you be thinking of about me?
Oh, I'd be frustrated and just not, I guess, just not in general happy.
Yeah, let's say you'd probably a lot more than frustrated there. I mean, I essentially cheated you kind of thing. But you get the idea that the more open and honest you are with the communication, the easier it is to deliver difficult or even bad news to a player and still get a positive response out of it. The last thing you want is for a player to turn into like a team cancer, because cancer spreads. The what's the old saying? A couple bad apples ruin the whole bunch, or something
Mhm.
like that. If you even have that happen with one player, could you imagine what would happen if they started, say, talking ill of the coaches to the other players, or really just harping on the way they were treated, whether or not that it's valid or not, that's completely irrelevant. But just doing that or introducing that kind of really mentality within the team, you see how that can very easily bring down or further separate a team from either each other or from the coaching staff.
Mhm.
And that's going to be a really difficult thing to build from or get past if that happens. So communication as a coach really is imperative that you're open and honest with everyone, even if that player you're speaking with ends up getting even like cut or something. It still will do you a lot better as a coach if you're being open and honest about the reasonings for it rather than making it a complete surprise. Now, if you are planning on cutting someone, this is it's a difficult conversation to have. I mean, it's a lot less often that you'll see this happen in, like, say, high school, but definitely does happen in college and professionals. But really, the approach you kind of want to take is you want to shoot someone once in the head. You don't want to shoot them 5 times in the chest and let them bleed out for half an hour. You know, at the same time, if you see, like, especially like, say, walk-ons in college, they come into fall ball and they're just tearing it up, but you literally have no spots for them. You're going to have to cut them, kind of thing. How do you communicate to a player that, granted is a walk-on, but they have done better than your scholarship players, that there's no longer a position for them on the team?
Um, I don't know. It's a hard topic to navigate, I guess, or conversation to navigate.
Yeah, it
But
is. It's difficult.
I don't know. I feel like as a player, I wouldn't want to be told like, well, any of that. But just in general, like you're really good, yada yada yada. But like we don't have room for you, so I just wouldn't want to be there. And I guess, but I know as a coach, I would tell them to try. This sounds bad, but try somewhere else. Like
Well,
if
no, that's not. I mean, that's not out of the realm of possibility there. And you're right. It's a difficult conversation to have, because the immediate question you're going to get from that player is, well, what could I have done different?
Mhm.
And as a coach, recognizing that there is nothing you could have done different. I mean, that's probably the most difficult thing, is you did exactly everything and more I asked you to do, and I still can't reward you, kind of thing. Now,
Yeah.
you may find other instances to get around it, like say, okay, we can redshirt you this year or something like that. Um, but yeah, there's not a single canned response you can have. It's things like that are the difficult conversations you do have to have. And this would be the same kind of thing as if you were, say, a manager having to fire an employee. You're going to have those kinds of issues come up. I mean, how do you tell someone that's been working at your company for 25 years that, and maybe you've only been there for 2, 3 years, but you come in as their manager, and you have to tell them, look, we don't have a position here for you anymore. Your position's being eliminated. You know, that's a difficult thing to do. And we'll talk more about this when we get on Friday, when we get into the motivational interviewing part. But communicating bad news, or the way you communicate bad news, is really the most important, or really is the most important aspect of communication, both on and off the field. If you're able to communicate bad news and elicit a positive response, then that's kind of where you're at the zenith of your communication skills. No one's ever going to take bad news with, as a great thing happening, kind of thing. I've never once lost a job and thought, man, this is awesome. But at the same time, you have to see how you can look for that kind of silver lining to it, or what you can do to help yourself and the player build off of those experiences. We talked about how some players can get like really motivated when you say, like, yell at them during a game, or some can, be really, you know, taken down by doing that. It's the exact same thing when you're having these off-field communications, when you're doing these hard decisions. Um, a kid I went to high school with, he graduated a year ahead of me. Um, he he played varsity baseball his senior year, but like barely played, like at all, like really just kind of was there. And then he went to Miami of Ohio, which is a D1 program, and tried to walk on the baseball team and got cut each of his freshman, sophomore, junior year. In his senior year, he actually made the team, like improved himself to the point where he made it, and he actually played, like he got quite a bit of game time too. Like, I think he really played something along the lines of like 20 to 30 games out of their 55 game season. Like, that's pretty impressive there. You don't see things like that happen, the Rudy Rudigers don't happen every day kind of thing. So being able to tell a player, like, and I can't imagine what he was told, sophomore, even especially that junior year being cut, how do you come back again for a fourth time when the first three times have not worked? Definition of insanity kind of there, right? Doing the same thing, making and expecting a different result. But, he improved to the point where he made it. That says not only a lot about him, but about the way that the coach communicated with him. And he was one of two people from my school that went to Miami to play baseball. And I got really conflicting information from both of them in terms of like how the coach was. The one that was there on scholarship was saying that like the coach would do things to like say scholarship players he didn't like, or like redshirt players he didn't like say make them play a single inning kind of thing so that they would lose their red shirt. And heard other things like he was great with like developing players and he was a real players coach, that kind of thing. So really conflicting information there. But just looking at that particular example, it shows that not only was the player determined to make themselves better, but it really also suggests that the coach did a really good job with communicating not only expectations, but communicating to the point where it didn't dissuade this player from trying again. Mm-hmm. I'm sure if the coach said something along the lines of, you're just not good enough, like you are not a D1 player, like you need to try, if you want to play baseball, you need to go somewhere else kind of thing. That would be, I think, a completely different conversation than, look, there is some potential in you, but you're definitely not there yet. Both of those are communicating the same exact thing. You are not a D1 player, but you see how both of those have a very, very different connotation. In medicine, you don't ever want to tell someone that has like a terminal illness or a terminal diagnosis that there's nothing more we can do for you right now, because what does that imply?
So they're not doing well and they're probably going to die.
Well, no, if there's nothing they can do for you right now,
sorry,
that implies they can do something for you later.
Oh yeah, that too.
And you don't want to give that false hope to someone that has a terminal diagnosis.
Yeah.
At the same time, you also don't want to say, look, you're dying, you're going to die, hey, you're dead. You don't want to slam that down their throats either. So the tact with it is just as important as the message. Both of them are conveying the same thing. Both of them, though, get interpreted much in two completely different ways. So if you're trying to do something, you do want to put someone down gently, but you do need to do it humanely, kind of thing. Now, this here, the communicating with parents, this was something I thought like left the realm of sports after high school, but apparently not. So I first signed with Eckerd College in Florida out of high school, and they're a D2 school, and no mention of parents at all. There was not even any informal chatter about it. When I transferred back to Ohio, I played this D3 school called Hiram College. And in our first team meeting before my sophomore year, our coach had this whole tirade on like making sure your parents aren't involved at all, essentially. So I don't want to hear from your parents. I don't want to hear your parents chirping like on the stands about like, say, playing time or things like that. If I do, I'll just straight cut you. And that really took like me aback. I mean, my parents had never been ones where, they were, the whatever coaches from the stands kind of thing. But at the same time, you have to see that growing up. I mean, with somebody, somebody's parents are those parents kind of thing. Um, but I never thought that was an actual issue in college. I always thought that college players were adults and they didn't have their parents at all part of it.
Mm.
Apparently not the issue. And then I found out, well, one of the girls on the softball team at that school was from California, and her mom would routinely fly up to Ohio for like once a month kind of thing to watch them play. And she was that parent. Like she was the one that would be trying to talk to the head coach during the game, why isn't Ashley playing and all this kind of stuff. And I can't imagine being a college coach where you're dealing with giving students money, like, we give you scholarships and whatnot, and then your parents are going to come and complain as though it's, something just like as simple as high school sports or whatever. So with that long-winded introduction, have you ever experienced anything from parents where it did put you in kind of a compromising or a tough situation or position in relation to their kids?
Um, yeah, yes and no. Like, I guess my least favorite thing, even though I was that person, I was just treated differently. But like, I don't like daddy ball. Because players get their way all the time.
Yeah.
I played daddy ball, I guess, but my dad put me last, so I had to work for it, which is not how most people do that. But um, that was probably my least favorite thing, because like they would get in situations and they would just talk to their dad as if they were their dad and not their coach at the time. And it's just like, none of us can do that. So
Mhm.
whatever.
Oh, absolutely. I think back to when I was coaching Pony League, and one of my biggest mistakes as a coach, because I was a pitching coach, I would fraternize with the parents like during the game. So especially like when we were, um, like say hitting, since I didn't, we had a head coach and 3 assistants um, for that travel team. I wasn't needed in the dugout for that. We had 2 coaches on first and third base, coaching the bases. We had our third coach was like the bench coach, so he was in there taking care of like all the hitters. And I was the pitching coach. I didn't like I would be kind of getting in the way, so I would go talk to the parents. And I distinctly remember at least one of them who would routinely, like, for lack of a better word, talk shit about us straight to our faces because his kid wasn't playing. And I had to respect him a little bit because he told us straight, like he would tell me straight to my face, like, yes, that's a dig against you kind of thing. He wouldn't, I never had to worry about hearing that secondhand kind of thing. But at the same time, I put myself in that position to have that happen because I would talk to the parents during the games. And I very quickly realized that that is something I cannot do. And as a coach, when you start fraternizing with parents, that now makes you much more vulnerable to not only criticism, but expectations from them as well, which you don't want to have.
Mm.
Your situation, like you said, is pretty rare. You don't usually see the coach's kid being treated like a player kind of thing. You see them treated as their kid. And at the end of the day, as a parent, you want to see the best for your kid, right? But at the same time, it's hard to navigate that when maybe, your kid isn't the best. And not saying anything about you and your ability level at all, but imagine that you yourself knew you weren't that good, but your dad kept putting you in the 3-4 hole kind of thing, and you played every single inning in the field. What does that tell you, and what perception does that give the rest of the team about you, kind of thing?
It makes me look pretty snotty and terrible because it looks like I'm getting my way, even though I know there would probably be better people than me that would be able to fill the 3 and 4 spot. But
Yeah. Um, when I was 13 and 14, well, actually, even before that, I had the same coach for my 3 years in Little League and my 2 years in Pony League. So between 10 and 14, I had the same coach. And he had two sons. One was my age, one was 2 years older than me. So I only played 1 year with the older son. Um, but the younger son was my catcher, especially in Pony League. And he wasn't that good. Like he was a serviceable catcher. He had a poor arm. He had an even worse bat. And he actually would take the position of, look, I know I'm not that good, but I'm doing a job we need. So I'm okay hitting in the 8, 9 hole kind of thing because I know that I'm still serviceable. But when it came time to have like the all-star team, I remember especially my 14-year-old year, the way our league was, we had two conferences or two divisions or whatever, and we would play each other, during the season. But when all-stars came, you had one all-star team for one division, one all-star team for the other division. And my coach was the only one that was supposed to take it because we finished second in our division. So what historically would happen is the winning division coach took the all-star team and also got the most players from their team on the all-star team kind of thing. And if they refused, then it went to the next coach, the next. Well, the first place coach refused. He just didn't want to do it, something, whatever. And the third and fourth place coaches already had backed out kind of thing. And they only had like one or two players that they were nominating anyway for the team. And my coach was going on vacation, like middle of what our all-star season was supposed to be. Like he had already planned this. So he had already essentially said no beforehand. And the league didn't want to give like the 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th place teams, they didn't want that to be taking over because they weren't, that great. And it was the first time that my catcher really said, look, I don't deserve to be an all-star. And if my dad was the coach, I would be an all-star. So something like that, is really kind of, speaking to your kind of experience as well. When you're able as like the coach's son to be able to take that kind of introspective approach and say, look, I don't really deserve this. That says a whole lot about how, you are as a person, but it also says as well about, like, say, the communication and the expectations the coach as your parent has for you and the kind of values they instill on you. So real long-winded way to say that that's an example of where, the coach parent can be very beneficial. Now, at the same time, though, when you get those parents that are complaining, that's when it's very difficult. Now, what happens, and this is very, very common in virtually all levels of the game, even in the lower, collegiate levels, like your NAIA, your D3, even D2 to an extent, when you have to do things like fundraising. And I distinctly remember in high school, one of the parents was like, he was a multimillionaire kind of guy. He ran a very successful business. He would essentially like sponsor the whole team kind of thing. But his kid wasn't that good. Now, this is where it gets very difficult because you essentially have like one donor that is funding your entire program kind of thing. How do you tell him I'm not going to play your kid?
Yeah, I don't know.
Well, because what's the threat there?
If you don't play him, you don't get everything that he's given you. So
Yeah. And granted, it's most likely only going to be for the time his kids, in the program. But at the same time, when you have something like that, you see just how difficult that is to manage. I mean, there's no correct way to approach that. Like, there really isn't. If you don't play him, you risk losing your funding. Well, if you lose your funding, you don't have a team. If you play him, you have an obvious deficit that you're going with. You have players, maybe one or more players. In this case, there was probably two, maybe three players that could play over him. So you're making your team weaker. You have discord in the team because players that may want or may have a legitimate claim to be playing aren't. But you see how all these problems can spiral out of control. And there's no right way to approach it. You know, that's another thing you really have to accept as a coach, that some situations have no way to win. There's no way out in some of these. And you just kind of have to do what you can that's best. What our coach ended up doing in high school was doing more of a platoon approach. So found that kind of things were kept at bay when that player was, say, given an opportunity to at least play during most all the games, and then it was shown that he couldn't perform. It was a lot easier then to not play him because he was given tons of opportunity and couldn't come through. We did a Florida trip at the beginning of the season, which again was almost like, it was terrible because it was like 75% funded by this guy, like by the parent, like chartered the plane for us kind of thing, paid for the hotels. Like it was just opening Pandora's box. But what was great was we played 12 games, no, 11 games in like 7 days. So we played mostly all double headers, which was great because everyone got playing time. And this kid got enough playing time where he was like, say, starting about half the games and went something along the lines of like 1 for 17 hitting, where it was enough that we were able to show that, hey, you can't play here kind of thing, that it really set the tone that, all right, we gave you your shot. There's nothing you can complain about anymore. And the player actually understood that really well. You know, that was actually the silver lining with it all, was the player wasn't one of those entitled kids kind of thing, thinking like, oh, my daddy did everything, so I should be playing kind of thing. But you see how, you know, these communication issues can be extremely tricky with things like that. Now, I don't want to keep you here all day, but the last thing I want to really touch on is communication with faculty and administrators. How much communication would you say you had, or even your other coaches had, with, like, say, high school teachers or the high school administration?
Um, I guess since our school was smaller, we had a decent amount, but it was like specifically only with teachers that cared.
Mhm.
But we actually had a decent amount of like time that they would talk to like school faculty. So
Yeah, and that's absolutely, that's a pretty good thing that you have there. I think of in high school, and really the only time that we talk to teachers, or that, well, not like I say we, like the players, but anytime the coaches talk to the teachers, it was really just like an extreme grades issue or something like that. Someone's not going to be eligible. Rarely, if ever, did we talk to administrators. I mean, the athletic director I know would like talk to us maybe once or twice a year kind of thing, but there was like nothing there. Now, when you get into college, it's a completely different story, because now, you know, you have a whole lot of administrators, you have a whole lot more pieces to the puzzle, and just getting a player to be eligible onto the field takes a lot of doing. So I'll show you this. Okay. So this is one of our basketball players, and they are ineligible because they didn't pass the 24-hour rule. Well, what the 24-hour rule is that in college, you have to have at least 24 hours of total credit that you earn in your last 2 years of attendance, or last 2 semesters of attendance. And if you don't have that, you're not eligible. When we look at this kid's kind of history here, I don't know if this will show up or not. Hopefully it does. Oh, I probably have to sign into this. You'll see with the eligibility requirements here, this is just for the fall 2020 term. You have your eligibility decision, you have how many years of competition you've used, how many terms of attendance you've used, your freshman requirements, your 24-hour requirements, and then this notes here is just any different little things that they didn't get kind of thing. But you see just how many different pieces to the puzzle there are with that. So I myself am the faculty athletics representative for my college, which means that I have to certify eligibility. So eligibility is determined by the NAIA or the NCAA. And what my role then is to make sure that our incoming transfer players, incoming freshmen, and our returning players all are first off given the correct eligibility determination, and that I either keep them eligible or get them back to eligibility. Mm-hmm. This year is especially difficult because with COVID, all spring sports didn't count as anything. So all of your spring competitions, especially like baseball, softball, they didn't count as anything. So it's like you never played. It's like they got a free red shirt kind of thing. And this fall is not counting as a term of attendance. So for both the NAIA and the NCAA, you get 4 years of eligibility, you get 4 seasons to play, and you get 10 semesters in which to do that. Well, that term of attendance is part of that. A term of attendance is those 10 terms or 10 semesters you get to be able to play 4 years. So 5 years total of residency to play 4 years of your sport. Well, the spring and this fall are not counting against that. So now I have to go and readjust everyone's kind of eligibility based on things like that. But point is, you see that there's a lot that goes into there. Well, I'm the contact point to everyone, like all of the athletic teams, about determining eligibility. How do you think you should be communicating with me if you're a coach and I am the person deciding if your players are eligible or not?
You should be communicating pretty well.
You'd hope so, right?
Yeah.
Now, anecdotally speaking, the baseball team has been the best to communicate with me. My office is actually right in, like, it's in the athletic department. Like, the assistant AD and head softball coach are right next door to me. The head basketball coach is 2 doors down. The AD is 5 doors away from me. And the baseball coach is on the other side of my office. So, I mean, everyone's right there. Well, our baseball coach has, like, always talks to me, what can I do to help you, kind of thing, which is great. And I tell him, like, get your students to sign up for this, or get your students to talk to me at this time. Perfect. It's great. I have the basketball coach who will just routinely stop me like in the middle of like the hallway sometimes and say things along the lines of, yo, why aren't my guys eligible? And it's like, I have no idea, first off, who you're talking about specifically or what it is they're supposed to be doing. Or he'll say, how many of my guys still haven't talked to you? Well, I don't know that because you haven't given me a roster. So you see how the levels of communication are extremely important between coach and athletics administrator. Because if I can't certify your athletes as being eligible, automatically they're ineligible, kind of thing. You know, the NCAA and the NAIA have this very binary stance. It is extremely black and white. You either are or you aren't. And if you aren't, you are not are. So even if someone is or possesses everything they need to be eligible, but I can't certify them in that way, they're automatically ineligible. The big thing there is that the like say the transfer students have to all meet with me personally. Like they have to have an actual one-on-one meeting with me so I could certify their eligibility coming in from a different school. Well, one of the kids that the basketball player coach was talking about specifically blew off our meeting twice. So now I told him and I told the player via email that if you want to meet with me, you both need to meet with me on my terms, kind of thing, because neither one of you seem to be taking accountability for this. I can't, like, I don't hold grudges, or at least I try not to, but this basketball coach is really trying me, you know? um, when you aren't taking proper accountability for your own sport, you see how difficult you make it for the administration. And ultimately, at the end of the day, it just hurts you because, like I said, if I have to rule your player ineligible, they're ineligible. I mean, they didn't do what they were supposed to do. You know, by rule, they have to be ineligible. So when you are communicating with administrators, it's super important that not only are you communicating effectively, but that you're being like honest and attentive with them. And I don't say that just from me, my experiences of being an administrator, but saying as though when someone determines your eligibility, you need to be in good, open, honest communication with them because they literally will decide what your final roster is. What I really find kind of hilarious is how much better some of the basketball players themselves are with their own accountability over the coach, kind of thing. That's kind of hilarious to me. So really at the end of the day, when you think of communication, you can really break it down to being open and honest, being able or being receptive to multiple points of view, and then making sure that communication's appropriate based on time, location, and person or group. I mean, those are pretty much the three big bullet points that you could summarize this whole thing with. All right, so that's about everything I wanted to cover in terms of communication here. Like I said, on Friday, I want to get into the motivational interviewing. Then next week, so next Wednesday, we won't meet. So I'll post a video for you to have ahead of time, and then we'll move on from there.
Right.
So if you don't have any questions, you are all good to go. And then I will see you here on Friday.
Thank you.
All right, you're welcome. You take care.
You as well.